All right, I might kick it off then. All right, to start things off, very big thank you to everybody for taking your lunchtime off to come along to our external delivery guild. So for today's session, the topic we're touching on is user stories in the pursuit of greatness. But before we go into all of that, a little bit of background. So my name is Binyamin Lawal. Everybody can just call me Bin if you'd like to. And presenting with me today is Osvel. So before we properly introduce ourselves, so something that we do here at Lexicon is guild sessions. We usually run them every month or so. These are usually just knowledge sharing opportunities for us internally, where we talk about some of our experiences, talk about some of the things we've learned, just really anything that we think is of value, that we think is worth sharing amongst ourselves, which is often quite helpful within the consulting space. But what we've actually been doing over the last couple of months is we're looking to see what we can do about extending it to the external community as well. So not just keeping all this goodness for ourselves, but allowing other people to benefit from it all. So over the last few months, we've actually started doing these quite regularly across all our practices, so engineering, delivery, and design. So please stay tuned, follow us on LinkedIn, and you'll be able to, you'll be informed whenever we're running any of these. So yeah, this is welcome to I believe our second external delivery guild. So as I mentioned, a little bit of introduction about ourselves. So my name is Binyamin Lawal, as I mentioned earlier on. Feel free to call me Bin. I've been at Lexicon just under 2 years now, but I've been within the software and delivery space for a little bit over 10 years. So a little bit of time now. I've had a lot of privilege to work across a lot of industries and a lot of fantastic teams. And these last 2 years at Lexicon have been a fantastic opportunity for me as well. So looking forward to sharing some of that experience with you all very shortly. Osvel, over to you.
Yep, thank you, Bin. So I'm Osvel Garza. I am one of the principal delivery consultants here. Similar to Bin, I joined almost 2 years ago. I started my career as a developer and then moved into agile ways of working. That's pretty much what I've been doing for most of my active career. And yeah, I'm very excited today to be able to share, as Bin said, to the wider community a bit of our experience and thoughts and reflections, opinions. So hopefully you enjoy it too.
Perfect. Okay, so if we move on to the next slide, why are we here, or what are we doing here? So what we're hoping to do is really just, as you would have heard, we've got hopefully a good amount of experience, and we're hoping to share some of that with you. And so we want to take this opportunity to discuss some of the approaches and views on some of the challenges that I believe we as delivery leads, BAs, or even software engineers face on a regular basis when it comes down to breaking down the stories and the work that we do in valuable chunks. So what can you expect from this session? We're hoping it's going to be a fairly interactive session. We're going to be talking about some of the things that we believe most of us might already know, but then also applying some practical approaches on top of that in terms of how we like to deal with some of these challenges. And who's it for? Just about anyone working within software delivery, whether it's working on small projects or incremental complex environments. But while that is where our focus is, I think it's also useful for anyone outside of that space to be able to take some of these ideas into consideration as well. But our focus is most definitely within the software space. And if we move on to the next slide, just a quick opportunity here to share with you guys 3 things. Firstly, if you'd like to ask any questions, by all means, feel free to just shout out at any point throughout the session. So more than happy for you guys to interrupt and ask your question, and we'll respond on the fly. But we also have a Slido Q&A set up for you to jump onto. So you can either scan that QR code or hit go to slido.com and put in that code. But then all of that aside, right at the very end, we will give everyone an opportunity just for a bit of a Q&A. And so you can just ask at that point. So without any further ado, Osvel, I'll hand over to you to kick us off.
All right, thank you, Bin. So yeah, we'll get started into the topic. I wanted to show you this photo that I'm sure that many of you have seen it. So it circulates a lot in the delivery circles, and I think that we all practitioners, we get it, right? So it's about effectively delivering the Mona Lisa in small increments. And our talk today is all about user stories and how best to write user stories, or more broadly, a scope. How do we do it in an iterative way? And as we know, the reason we want to do this is, twofold. One is that we want to get feedback frequently to make sure that when you are delivering something is going into the right path. And second, deliver early, so get value early. So if we move from the Mona Lisa to, let's say, an application, because we probably don't deliver the Mona Lisa that often. So let's say, we have a technical application here, very simple, simplistic picture. On the left, you see how the scope items there are cut horizontally. And, we know, again, I'm just touching the basics now, but we know that delivering a scope horizontally is probably not the best, right? Because you don't have, like in the right-hand side, the ability to split things vertically and give a taste of the change to the end user and get that feedback early and often that we talk about. So in order to do that, there are a number of techniques. One of my favorites is the elephant carpaccio. So again, you probably are familiarized with this from Alistair Cockburn. If you are not, yeah, I definitely encourage you to Google it. But effectively, carpaccio is an Italian dish, and it's about meat that you will cut really thinly, so thinly that you will eat it raw. So the idea is that an elephant, a big program of work, can be cut into very thin vertical slices. And effectively, those slices of a scope, that's what become your user stories. There is also this very famous criteria where good user stories are meant to adhere to. It's called INVEST. Again, I encourage you to Google it if you're not familiarized with it. But in a nutshell, it stands for stories need to be independent. That's the I. That means that, well, you can scope, build the story, test it, and deploy it independently of the others. And for negotiable, so that means that each user story will have a priority, and you can negotiate that with your stakeholders. Then the V, valuable or vertical slice, and that's probably what we are going to be focusing more on the rest of the talk. Valuable to the end user in that case, and vertical as we saw before with the example of the elephant carpaccio. E for estimable, so you can size it. Small, as we saw before, you want to get feedback early and often, so it cannot go on for many sprints, and testable, right? That each user story, can be accepted or not. Now, just to acknowledge, yeah, so I put that cartoon in there because, yeah, there is no E for easy on invest. So it's not, yeah, it's quite, I mean, if especially you're a BA, you probably have experienced that it is a good ideal, but it is quite complicated to actually follow that criteria completely. And I would like to ask the audience and make you work a little bit. like to ask what sort of obstacles you find. Let's say that you want to, as we discussed it, good user stories. They are small, they are vertical, they are valuable to the end user. But what obstacles do you find in the real world? So I will invite you to use your mobile phone and scan that QR code. And then just in a word or two, I put some examples there in terms of what obstacles you encounter when attempting to write those user stories. Could be like the testing part, the business ownership. So yeah, if you can go to Menti. If you did not manage to get the QR code, you can always go to menti.com and then just add that code in there. That can also work, and I will attempt to paste it into the channel.
Already beat you to it as well.
You
It's
already did
in the
it.
chat.
Okay, we are so well coordinated. Yeah. All right, I can see. Yeah, dependent conflicting priorities. Yeah, tightly coupled features. I like that. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Let's see what else. Okay, there are more coming up. Backend heavy feature. That's an interesting one because yeah, that tells you that if you have a feature that is already sort of almost only backend, well, that's not kind of almost not the right place to start to do to write user stories that benefit the end user. So yeah, that's a very interesting one.
I'm assuming DOD stands for definition of done there. So define clear definition of done.
Yeah, that's right. And yeah, sometimes quite a challenge to agree what done is. Completely agree. Complex requirements, yeah, they can be like all over the place, and just to find that thin slice across it, yeah, it's really really complicated.
Okay.
All right, so let's move on. Thank you very much for participating there. Yeah, and yeah, this is our list for what we have experienced. So when your team does not own the full tech stack, that makes it really hard to. Maybe you can scope a user story that is vertical and cuts across, all of the all of the stack in your application, but you won't be able to deliver it. It will just have lots of dependencies with other teams. Second one, legacy architecture. You might have a monolith, and again, it will be hard to just identify, a story that cuts across. Testing is another one that I have seen in places in which if you modify a line of code somewhere, then you have to do kind of full end-to-end testing of multiple things because yeah, there is no automation. For example, segmented team structure. So if you have teams that are still only developers and only testers and only kind of DevOps, then again that makes it hard to have those to write and deploy a user story that covers everything, and also unclear business ownership, as mentioned before in the Menti. Yeah, sometimes that's multiple POs involved into the same feature makes it hard again to have that focus. So yeah, in principle, you wish you had a cake, right? Because as we said, you want to cut vertically. So if you have a user interface, middle tier, and databases in this cake, you want to have that slice that does a little bit of everything. Hopefully with the cherry on top, people can taste this slice and give you feedback on all of the layers. The problem is that many times you don't have a cake as that. It looks more like an spaghetti bolognese. And yeah, that will be really hard to follow all the threads of pasta there. What do I mean by that? So maybe let's put it on more kind of systems terms, right? Like in this picture here, you see at the top you have the UI type of components, right? And the new one, legacy, mobile apps, middle, TI, you have the logic, and then the backend. The backend you have kind of the database integrations and all that. Now in this picture, you will notice that teams are assigned to the different components, and that's an anti-pattern as we know. And again, having that vertical feature that is depicted here with that blue oval on the left, will be really, really hard. If your team is there at the top and you want to deliver across all of the stack, then you'll have to be interacting with the other teams, and it will just make it hard. And then if we overlay this with the business ownership that we talk about and the POs, it might look a little bit more like this, where now imagine you have a number of people you need to talk to just for a single story, and you have approvals for multiple POs in the business, so it can get very complicated. So, but what happens, right, when you have all the good intentions and you want to apply the invest principle, you want to have your slices as the elephant carpaccio, and then people see in your team and in the organization that cannot be done, cannot be implemented straight away. So I just wanted to call out, what happens here, and hopefully, maybe this resonates with you. But so sometimes, there's understanding, but also, when you are faced with these challenges, you'd see, reactions like the ones on the left that are probably is jumping into conclusions straight away. Have issues with dependencies, and there is finger pointing about other teams, or you have also again jumping into conclusions and people saying like, well, just agile just doesn't work, right? These practices are good in paper, but really it doesn't work. Or on the right hand side, that people understand what the issues are, but they think more kind of long term, and top in the top right hand side. Maybe it's an organization where the architecture is monolithic, is falling apart. Then they say, well, we cannot really, we should continue doing, our waterfall until we change our architecture. Or at the bottom right, where need to change your organizational structure if the business ownership is not clear. So what do you do in these cases, right? How do we deal with these misinterpretations or noise? And well, yeah, how do you balance, right? How do you balance the kind of that long-term progress, because you still definitely want to keep moving to that long-term, changing the architecture, but how do you still deliver value right now? And if you had a magic wand, that's probably the best. But if you don't have a magic wand, then yeah, it gets hard. And we are going to discuss an approach, a simple approach, next, and that's what Bin is going to take you through next.
Perfect. Okay. So on that note, we've just talked about what is ideal in terms of thin vertical slices going end to end. We've talked about some of the challenges we face while trying to strive for this ideal and some of the difficult conversations. It's a difficult thing to do, right? Like we called out earlier on, this is not easy, whether it's in terms of vertical slices or otherwise. The work that we do is simply not easy. But at the end of the day, everybody here and everybody involved wants to deliver value. And I want to focus on that point in saying value is what we're after. And so what we're talking about here, or what we're putting forward here, is hopefully nothing too groundbreaking, but really just rethinking how we convey the value that it is that we're trying to deliver, how we convey the message around the value that we're trying to deliver. So if we go on to the next slide, hopefully you guys have all kept your Menti tabs open. We have another question for you here if it chooses to load up. So if we go to the next one. Okay, so can anyone here give an example where your user stories or the piece of work that you've delivered or worked on still delivered value without actually being a complete vertical slice? I'm very curious to see what other people's experiences have been so far. I can see one example that has come up already where it resolved complexity or uncertainty. So if I was to kind of summarize that a little bit further, this is like maybe doing a bit of a spike to get more clarity, but also resolving complexity. So just finding a means to simplify the work that you're doing from a technical stance. UI kit, so setting things up from a UI perspective, which will simplify things down the line. Lowered risk, tech debt remediation. All very, very good examples. Might give it a couple more seconds to see if there's any more about to pop in. And got feedback from product owner. So yeah, all fantastic examples and all align very well with kind of what we're getting at here. So if we move on to the next slide, and apologies if you're in the middle of typing and we've kind of just skipped ahead, but we'll keep the conversation going all the same. In effect, what we're proposing is something that we're calling a value reach. So the idea there being that throughout the work that we're doing, we're breaking down user stories based on the value that they're going to deliver. And it's not necessarily always going to directly impact the end user or get to the end user, but at the end of the day, it's still going to deliver value to someone. And the intention here is to make that nice and clear and visible. So you might have some foundational tickets. So to some of the examples we saw earlier on, you might have some spikes, but you also might have things like CI/CD pipelines, automated test frameworks, just a whole lot of the underlying piping that simplifies things for the development team or allows the development team to work more effectively and more efficiently. So those sorts of stories have a high degree of value because it means you can actually complete your work in a reasonable amount of time and do a good job of it, right? Another example being visible but not deployable stories. So I think there was one example in the mentee board earlier on talking about getting quick feedback from product owners. So I think that's probably one of the key examples that we have there. So that way you're able to just get that value across, get that feedback, get that understanding of you're going along the right track without having to have all the technical piping in place and sorted to get the end-to-end working. And then last but not least, you also have the full end-to-end working software. This is the ideal that we're striving for. And if you are able to pull these sorts of tickets out and break them down in this sense, then fantastic. You're already a step up on a lot of people. So these are simply examples. They aren't the be-all and end-all of what the breakdown is. But just to call it out from our perspective, you often get foundational tickets. You often get tickets that are visually representative without being the whole way through. And then once in a while, wherever you're lucky, you're able to get those full end-to-end tickets. And if we move on to the next slide, I have an example. So here is, if anyone here has worked in Jira, you probably hopefully recognize this view. But here's an example ticket that we have. And so what it says within it is, as a user, I want a confirmation screen informing me that I have completed my registration so that I know there are no more steps to be taken. And what we've called out within scope here is a UI build and mock endpoints. And out of scope is the full end-to-end flow. Because as one of Osvel's examples, maybe we have a separate team that's handling the backend implementation. And so we want to build out the UI before we get to the point of connecting to those APIs. So off the back of this, I have another Menti question for everybody. So hopefully you still have your phones out or your separate tab open. Okay, if we jump over to, and one more. So what are some of the pros and cons for the user story that we just showed everyone? Just to separate the two, please prepend a pro or a con onto your example or your point. Okay, we've got some points coming through already. May need to be retested once backend is implemented, which is absolutely right. So a little bit, or maybe a lot more overhead once you have to circle back to that. Pro can still deliver part of the feature set without linked dependency to another dev team. Exactly right. You don't want to necessarily be sitting around twiddling your thumbs until that backend is ready. You want to still be able to progress and deliver that value. Pro, stories can be kept small. Absolutely right. And con might give the impression that it's done. And I think that's a really good one as well. When you're working in these sorts of tickets or these sorts of stories, if it's not completely and utterly clear, which is going to be a point that we're going to make very shortly, people might misinterpret it. They might be like, cool, you've given me a showcase, you show me what it looks like, I see it working, perfect. It's done, let's move on to the next thing. And so that in itself can cause a little bit of confusion. Cool. All right, so we might carry on, if that's okay. So to the point of this, I guess, framework, for lack of a better term, that we've touched on here, when is a suitable time for us to use this or for anyone to use this? Whenever you're coming across some of the challenges that Osvel mentioned earlier on, when you're getting a lot of pushback, people saying, oh, Agile's not working, when you have not cross-functional teams, where you have multiple teams working on different things and you're just constantly stuck and unable to progress and unable to actually hit that ideal thin slice. This is a fantastic opportunity to come in and go, cool, what kind of value can we deliver? But in all honesty, you can probably use it at pretty much anytime you're delivering software, anytime you're working on large, complex solutions. We feel that it's very helpful to be able to bring this sort of a mindset into the mix. So if we scooch over to the next slide, Osvel, and to give a little bit of structure around what we're proposing, because so far we've just been talking ideas and feelings and how we see these sorts of things working across our experiences. There's three key things we're keen to call out here. So to my earlier point, the first and foremost is making the value very clear and very visible. So being able to say, hey, this is a foundational ticket, but we are doing this because it's going to show us, we're going to get this value out of it. It means that with a CI/CD pipeline, it means that our cycles are going to be so much quicker. We're going to be able to turn around builds and make sure that it works and make sure that it doesn't break anything down the line within the space of minutes or whatever the case may be, rather than having to redo everything from scratch yourself and go through a tedious process every single time. But being very clear and explicit as to what that value is and making sure that anyone involved is able to see that, which feeds very nicely into the next point of taking everyone along on that journey. So again, using the example of a foundational ticket, if we talk about a foundational ticket, anyone from a technical background or technical space, I'm like, cool, yeah, makes perfect sense. Happy days. I like this ticket. Let's do that one. But when you're talking about your product owners or the business, and you just say, hey, we're doing CI/CD and we're doing integration and APIs, they're going to be like, what is that? What are you talking about? Why do I care about this, right? So it's important to bring them along on the journey as well. So it's important to translate the value from a technical stance into what it means for them as a business. It means, hey, we'll be able to get through the work a little bit quicker. It means we'll be able to build our tickets with confidence that it's not going to break half the other things that we've already done. And so we're not going to have to circle back and fix everything up and add months to your project or whatever the case may be, right? So being able to have that conversation with everybody involved in order for them to be confident and comfortable with what value you're putting forward within the sense of the ticket. And then last but not least, but hopefully something quite simple, and we think does bring a lot of value to this whole framework or process, is visualizing it. So taking the opportunity or taking the time to go, hey, for all of our foundational tickets, let's just put them up as red tickets. For all of our visuals only, let's make them green or blue or whatever. And then for all of our thin slice, end-to-end perfect tickets or perfect user stories, let's make them green. Just being very clear as what each card is and easily being able to identify them. If we jump over to the next slide, you'll actually be able to see an example as to why you might want to do that visual representation. So if, for example, you're looking on the left-hand side there and you just see a whole wall of red, you know that you're heavily focused on foundational, and that in itself might be a red flag in itself to go, hey, are we focused on the right things? Are we in the right place? Are we actually able to do this work as efficiently as we need to or we want to? Maybe we need to take a step back and rethink it. Maybe our focus needs to be shifted, whatever the case may be, right? Really just an opportunity for you to have that conversation wherever necessary. And then more than likely, it will be some mix of all the different colors, because a lot of different people working on a lot of different things is usually spread out. But then if you're lucky and you happen to have more of a view of the right-hand side where majority are green, then happy days. You're in a good state. You don't need this. You can go home now, right? So it is very valuable. It is very, very important to be able to pick up on these things almost instantly just by seeing it. So if you do have the capacity or capabilities to color coordinate some of these things, then we can see a lot of value in having something like that in place. Cool. Sorry, before we jump ahead, does that make sense? I feel like Osvel and I have talked through quite a lot, but hopefully that has has been nice and clear to everybody. Cool. All right. Osvel, I'll hand back over to you.
Right. So it's time to just conclude, wrap up. So now what? So we discussed at the start of the talk the challenges. So I guess that one of the main messages is to understand what those challenges are, and then adapt to that. The other main message that been mentioned in the last few minutes is not to be too short-sighted in the sense that we just have tickets there and that's good. That's as long as you have user stories on your board and people keep working, that's all good. If you see that there is a lot of red, for example, if you are categorizing your foundational or not complete vertical stories as red, and then you see that that's happening, then okay, well, maybe there is something wrong there. But also, kind of the other side of the story is, not being paralyzed by an impossible task of trying to sort everything out before you can actually start working in iterative ways. A bit of a balance. So I think those are the three main messages, and how to implement it. Well, just if we wanted to summarize like 3 key points that we believe could be useful to achieve that achieve that balance is first understand the current limitations, but also the end game. So what is where you want to get to? You want to have a you want to operate in a capacity in which you keep delivering small increments to live end to end. Quite often, well, what does that mean, right? It means perhaps having lots of microservices, a better architecture, different organizational structure, whatever it is. So getting to know that end game. Then second one is visualizing that value reach, like where you are at this point of the game. So how can you visualize how much you are delivering to the end user and how much is just probably foundational or kind of midway there because of the restrictions you have. And third is just to coach the team and to be pragmatic. I guess that part of the a big summary of the talk is being pragmatic and balance what can be done now without losing sight of the end goal.
And just to add one extra little bit to that last point there, while we've given something of a lightweight framework in terms of what we've talked about, as with most things agile and as with most things that we do in terms of the work that we do, it all is very dependent, right? What might work perfectly for my team might not work perfectly for your team. So it is important to take your own context and your own situation into consideration and kind of put something in place that works for you, works for your team. It doesn't have to be exactly what we said, but that pragmatic mindset and that balance is absolutely key there.
Yeah. And to that point, so we hope that, this was thought-provoking. I think that was the main objective, that you got some reflections out of that you maybe relate to some of the things that we discussed. Maybe you agree with some, maybe you disagree with some. That's all great. That you have your own opinions. The idea was to discuss something, put it on the table, and and get you all of us thinking. Before we move into questions, and we can go into the Slido, and if anyone else wants to just ask a question on the fly, just wanted to mention that we are in LinkedIn. You can find us there, and there will be more of these skills in the future, not only in delivery but also across engineering, design, and product. And on behalf of Bin and myself, just thank you. And if you want to contact us for further discussions or questions, you can also find us on LinkedIn.
Yep, fantastic. I've just jumped over to the Slido. I do not think that there are any questions unless I've missed it somehow. No, it's looking all good. But as Osvel mentioned, we're more than happy to open up the floor. If anybody has any questions now, please throw them our way.
Or comments, if people have comments, something else to contribute or another perspective, that's definitely welcome.
Oh, Adam, I feel like you're talking, but you're on mute. Oh. Technology, why must you fail us? Feel free to type it into the chat if you'd like, and I can read it out for everybody. If anyone else has any burning questions or comments, feel free to call it out while we're waiting.
There's one in the slide I've been.
Oh, perfect. Let me bring that up and I'll read it out to everybody now. So anonymous question: how do you deal with working through a story that has unclear business value, e.g. PO has prioritized it without context? Is a good question. Osvel, do you want to try to tackle this one?
Yeah, well, maybe I'll refer to definition of ready. So if the team has agreed on a clear definition of ready and the story does not comply to it, then it will be it wouldn't be an argument, right? It will just be a clear situation where, yeah, the story is not ready, needs to go back, and stakeholders need to clarify it.
Yeah, and I might add to that as well to say, I think a lot of these things are conversational, right? Like if a product owner comes to you with a story that's zero context and they prioritize it and said, hey, this is what you have to do. If the team doesn't quite get it, they're probably going to fail. Like you're setting yourself up for failure at that point, right? So you want to have the conversation with the product owner, like, why? What's the value to this story? Why are we doing this? Or like, where do you see this going? How does it fit the bigger picture? So it is important to have that conversation. And if the product owner isn't willing and they just go, no, just go do it, then that in itself is a different challenge to try to solve. Hopefully that answers your question.
Adam wrote in the chat, we see a lot of ready feels like a really good opportunity to talk to stakeholders about environment issues or ways and working and or why they might not see value immediately. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. So just to kind of circle back to one of Osvel's points about finding that balance where you want to do the here and now, but you also still want to work towards that long-term goals of overall improvement. If all you're doing are red cards or foundational because you have to, then you also need to find the means of going, okay, clearly the structure isn't right. Clearly something's missing here. How can we address that in order to enable ourselves to do more complete work? And
it is,
go for it.
it is also, this talk is also contextual, right? Because I thought maybe it will upcomment the discussion, but if you are in an organization that is going through a kind of ways of working transformation, and that's kind of the main mandate, you probably want to maybe dig your heels a little bit more, right? And if you have lots of red, you say, oh, we cannot really work like that, and maybe it's less practical. You have to be less practical of getting things done in the short term, and maybe push more on that kind of long term. Right? But depends where you are and how well positioned you are to do that.
And then within the comments, Ben has added in terms of that last question, good to understand what success metrics or OKRs the stories link to. And so that's in terms of a no context story pushed by the PO. Good to be able to tie it back into those OKRs and success metrics. Exactly right. Okie dokie. Well, if there's nothing else, I think we can probably wrap it up there. Once again, thank you all very much for attending. Appreciate your being able to take your lunchtime to listen to us jabber on. Please feel free to follow, connect, whatever the case may be. And we look forward to seeing you guys at our next guild.